Hello, I'm Archie Luxury, and today I'd like to talk about the classic Omega Speedmaster. And when I talk about the classic Omega Speedmaster, I'm talking about the very early incarnation of this piece. And the Speedmaster became the Speedmaster Professional, but originally it was not called the Speedmaster Professional. I believe it gained this title in the mid-60s. The other interesting fact is that the big classification with the Omega Speedmaster is whether it's a pre-moon or it's post-moon. And obviously the Omega Speedmaster became the official first watch worn on the moon, and the backs of all the Omegas were engraved as such. And the fascinating thing is that the pre-moon ones have become more valuable over time. And the fascinating thing is that the 3-2-1 movement pieces are pre-moon, and some of the early 8-6-1 movement pieces are also pre-moon as well. So that's sort of the timeline, because you got to remember the first Speedmaster came out in the late 50s, 57, 58, and the moon landing, of course, was in the late 60s. Now, the other interesting thing is that the model slowly evolved. The size of the case on the original series was about 38 and a smidgen millimeters. Over time, this grew. The other interesting change in these pieces is the fact that the original early pieces had straight lugs. Later on, this changed to a more curved type lug, which is on most Omega Speedmasters. Now, as far as the desirability and collectability goes, it's like any collectible. The earliest and the most original and best condition pieces attract the big premium. Unfortunately, even people who had the original pieces, they've sent them into watchmakers, if not Omega, and the hands have been known to be changed when you've sent it in for a service. And the funny thing is that you might think, well, that's doing the best thing possible to preserve the watch, but it absolutely kills the value, because if you could have any piece in the world today, it'd be an early Omega Speedmaster with original dial, original bezel, original hands. That would be the top billing, with box and papers. And unfortunately, it's one of these things. No one realized these would be hugely valuable things in the future. And it's quite interesting when you look at an early Omega Speedmaster. It's got those straight lugs. That's a pattern which many other makers also had at the time. If you look at the early Navi timers, that's the Breitling Navi timer, which had a manual wind mechanical movement. It also had similar straight type lugs. So a lot of these pieces here, they're although now they've got a very set way that they look, they didn't often start out like this. The rarest Omega Speedmaster is the first series, which is the 2915, CK2915. And these pieces are exceptionally rare. I did a bit of a search on Chrono24, and I came out empty-handed. I did find one for sale, and that was through the very famous author and watch aficionado James Dowling. I'm personally, I don't mind his work, but as a person, I find him a I don't know what you'd say. He's a bit of a pain. He's very aloof. He's very aloof, and I've had a bit of dealings with him. He's always been honourable, but I think his price is probably anything James Dowling's selling is hugely reliant on it being so original and correct, and also a big premium because of who he is. So there was a CK2915 on his website for £50,000. And these early Speedmasters have the smaller case, they got the straight lugs, they got the broad arrow hands, and they've got the steel bezel. And that's probably the most desired, the rarest and hardest to get Omega Speedmaster of all time. Now, these pieces, they do come up in auctions, and they are huge money. James Dowling thinks it's worth £50,000. That might be a bit hopeful, but one thing is, you're certainly not going to pick one up for £5,000 or £10,000. The other interesting model is the model after that, the CK2998, which this model came out a couple years after the first one. So the first one came out in '57. So this model CK2998, a couple years later, and it still had the very similar case, the lugs themselves there, but they did away with that steel bezel. Now, you do find a few CK2998s around the place. I had a look on Chrono24. Again, it depends whether you got original dial. When I say original, it might be a correct dial, but was that the original dial for the watch, or was it changed in a service? And also, of course, the hands play a very important part. And you can see a few of these depending on what the condition and what original parts they have with it, and that they range in price. There weren't that many on Chrono24, around $5,000 to $17,000. We're talking US dollars. So, you know, they seem to be a bit more readily available if you're after a very nice vintage piece. And there are a few other models, but those two early models are probably the most desired of the Speedmasters. And I'd certainly, I'm not a vintage person myself. I'm contemporary modern. I like my pieces to be not current model, so out of production, but within 10 to 15 years of going out of production. Contemporary modern, I like to call the pieces that I collect. But the 2998 and the 2915, they are both great investment choices. And if I was a collector of vintage sports pieces, which would probably be one of the best investments in vintage watches, you certainly couldn't go wrong with having a 2915 and a 2998 in your collection. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the very iconic Omega Speedmaster. I love them, and I've tried to bring this series looking at certain iconic models, the first and second series of these models, to show you where the legend began. I'm Archie Luxury. Tell me what you think.